Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's episode of Newsflash. Very excited because we do have a packed show for you. Of course, continuing, I say this every time, continuing with our coverage of the war on Gaza because, let's be honest, we were supposed to talk about Taylor Swift as the cover of the Time magazine. Good for her. She deserved it. Seriously, though. Anyway, we are talking about continuing Israeli bombardment, making aid efforts nearly impossible as they now move into the southern city of Khan Yunis. Israeli tanks are now on the outskirts, as we are just getting reports in of that, as they, essentially no safe place. Not essentially, there is no safe place to go in Gaza at the moment, as the UN chief Guterres has invoked a seldom-used article to try and force the Security Council to do something. Some pretty remarkable video played and aired on CNN of the freed hostages really taking it to Benjamin Netanyahu, revealing some of the anger at his government. Also reporting in Haaretz, that really shocking reporting, that the night before they received Israeli government received a very, very firm, serious warning about a possible attack, yet did not call anyone at the Nova Festival, did not call anyone to warn them at all. Also, we're talking about AOC offered $100,000 by AIPAC to start the conversation. She turned them down. And a quick little piece of context, shall we say, about the supposedly horrific anti-Semitic Kristallnacht-style protest that we saw out of Philadelphia earlier this week. We do have some, just general updates to get to here at the top of all things to do with the war on Gaza. As what else is new? Palestinians across Gaza facing relentless Israeli bombardment at this point as military offensive in the south of the enclave continues, as they continue now to push into, by all accounts, firmly the Khan Yunis area at this point. Israeli tanks on the outskirts of the city, according to the New York Times. Obviously, the source of information on this not really very good, but it's just, again, the best that we have to go on. The UN chief Antonio Guterres has invoked a pretty remarkable situation. So he invokes, it's called Article 99 of the UN Charter for his first time in his tenure as Secretary General. He says, facing a severe risk of collapse of the humanitarian system in Gaza, I urge the Council to help avert a humanitarian catastrophe and appeal for humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. So what he is saying, I urge the members of the Security Council to press to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. I reiterate my appeal for a humanitarian ceasefire to be declared. This is urgent. So again, seems like, another kind of strongly worded, letter here. In Resolution 2712, he references, of 2023, the Security Council called for the scaling up of the provision of such supplies to meet the humanitarian needs of the civilian population, especially children. At least 130 UN RWA colleagues have been killed by Israel. Just really also, another remarkable point that he brings up in that letter. But the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten international peace and security. So this calls for, again, a resolution and a vote at the Security Council. So essentially just saying, guys, you got to, do another resolution on this, which is, not the most, jaw-dropping thing in the world, but it has received some pretty warm reaction from around the world, with WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, I think that's how you say his name, saying, I support Secretary General Antonio Guterres' letter to the UN Security Council invoking Article 99 and appealing for a ceasefire. Gaza's health system is on its knees and near total collapse. We need peace for health. Pedro Sanchez weighing in, Spanish Prime Minister. Jennifer Cassidy, who's a diplomacy lecturer at Oxford. It's kind of a, which one of these two is not like the others, but she said, is essentially pushing the panic button at the UN and taking over control of the UN Security Council agenda. This is an unprecedented move. It's a small ounce of hope, but some hope nonetheless. And again, it's so unprecedented, but it's also the UN. So the best they can do is say, we're going to hold, we're going to really make you pass a non-binding resolution this time. So again, nothing, if I were in Gaza, I would be, at best, rolling my eyes, and that's kind of putting it nicely. But there apparently has been a new resolution circled in response to this by the UAE. The Gulf countries called for the Security Council to urgently adopt a humanitarian ceasefire resolution after the UN chief Guterres had invoked Article 99. So it seems like there will be, they say in its draft resolution, it has the support of the Arab Group and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So, that obviously doesn't matter because the U.S. has veto power and, will most likely veto that. It would be really, that would be the big deal if the U.S. vetoes a ceasefire resolution out of the Security Council, but that is kind of how it stands on that front. There continues to be protests and vigils held. This one at the UN headquarters by Doctors Without Borders, in a call for the Gaza ceasefire, remembering some of the nurses that have been killed, including Ala Al-Shawa, who's was a nurse in Gaza who was killed on November the 18th. Again, just calling for you to ceasefire. Africa Stewart, president of the board of Doctors Without Borders, spoke at the candlelight vigil in front of the UN headquarters in New York. Really just horrific stuff. Again, as we're seeing just continuing images, videos, just like almost, after you've seen it, just and been so powerless. So the cognitive distance you have to have, just see that and just, not become, it's like, I'll be, 100% real. Like, seeing that, knowing really there's nothing I can do, it's just like you see another video, it's like, a child going through the most unimaginable suffering in the world. It's like being in such a position of, privilege that I am, and just being in the West, being in, a relatively very good part of the West, like it is so hard it's impossible to wrap your mind around the level of horror and the level of suffering that the people in Gaza are going through right now. And just seeing it, time and time again, just video after video popping up on, the timeline or whatever, you can almost, it can lose the shock value, it can lose the horror value, but it really, at least, and I hope for all of you as well, I know for me, it never really loses just the rage value, just the why, like on a basic human level, why is this happening to so many innocent people? And I think, the biggest number you need to understand is that 94% number the UN put out of percentage of civilians versus percentage of Hamas militants. It's just like how many people's lives it's we cannot, if you are listening to this and you are not in Gaza or at least have not gone through an analogous situation, it's just like you will have no shot of possibly understanding what these people are going through. And it really is remarkable. So the EU foreign policy chief, pretty interesting here, Josep Borrell, has urged EU members of the UN Security Council and other countries to support the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call for a ceasefire. It's going to be interesting to see what hardcore Zionist and head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, has to say about that. He tweeted, I ask Josep Borrell Fonteles, as the leader of the EU, kind of on the foreign policy side, he said, I ask EU members of the UN Security Council and like-minded partners to support UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call. The UNSC must act immediately to prevent a full collapse of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. So there you have it. Some pretty remarkable stuff. Also pretty remarkable is this clip here. This is a clip of a clip, which in that clip will be also played a clip of a clip. I'll explain it. But anyway, Ynet is a Israeli publication that recently obtained audio of this very interesting meeting that freed hostages had with Netanyahu. And it's really, remarkable stuff. I almost want to, while this is playing, pull up the full article and get more details. But this is how it was discussed in CNN. And they play like a brief little snippet of what's being said. And if they don't provide, audio translations, I will just, narrate over the written translations on the video clip.
A recording of a meeting between hostages themselves and their families with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They accuse him of playing politics, of prioritizing prioritizing politics over freeing the hostages. They say that the intelligence services in Israel didn't have a good sense of where the hostages were being held. And they say that Israel's military campaign even endangered and wounded some of the hostages. I want to play a clip of one of the women in this meeting. She herself was a hostage with her children. They were freed, but her husband is still inside. She says that no one was doing anything for them, she says, and that Israeli shelling actually wounded them. Take a listen.
You will return them all. They will not wait 50 days. They will not wait another year, because you claim that they are strong enough. You have no information. You have no information. The fact that we were shelled, the fact that no one knew anything about where we were.
Yeah, and I mean, she's got a pretty valid, understandable point there, because just think about it. It's like, if you're in there, and especially if you're out and your husband is still there, just like the psychological damage that can do, it's just unimaginable. Talk about unimaginable. That is also, really unimaginable. The fact that you are in this hellscape, and also the fact that your government, in a lot of ways, is making that hellscape worse for your family. Just, she was injured in shelling, the probability, just like, the probability that there were, rapes committed on October 7th, there was also a high probability that indiscriminate Israeli shelling also killed, or at least, we know it injured at least some hostages, most likely, may have killed some as well. But it is, it's really, really shocking to see them, kind of come out and give almost visualization, give voice to what we all knew. Because it's like they have no information, like they, have no information, and by all available evidence they show, do not seem to really care that much about getting every single hostage back safe and sound, because of their indiscriminate bombing and the fact that they have no real way, the Israeli government does, of knowing where these people are, and the fact that they, again, just go in anyway, is an incredibly dangerous and incredibly, scary thing, undoubtedly, for anyone who's involved. So they capture the anger. Let's see here. This is in the Ynet article. Former captive from kibbutz Nir Oz, who was recently released as part of the deal, said, "I experienced captivity and I understand its hardships. Every day in captivity was extremely challenging. We were in tunnels, terrified that it would not be Hamas, but Israel that would kill us. And then they would say that it was Hamas that killed us." So the thing about that, like this, the fact that this quote is not being trumpeted around as a ringing indictment of not only the Israeli government's treatment of the Palestinians, but the Israeli government's treatment of, even if you're, some kind of centrist liberals and a lot of the right wingers in America and don't find Palestinians human, you probably find, at least to some degree, the humanity of the Israeli hostages to be something of concern. And the fact that they are now coming out, obviously not, it doesn't speak for everyone, but, I'll throw in the usual cap, but the fact that there is a meeting where the tenor of the meeting is, you were getting us killed, and we were more worried about Hamas, or you killing us, and then turning around and say Hamas did it. So I feel like that is an incredible quote to say, to hear, and I think it's really something that when you consider the, future narrative, the future rhetoric of, just the pro-Zionist side in the first place, talking about how, Hamas, doesn't care for the, doesn't care for the, I'm sure it's not, great, but the fact that this, this dynamic of Israel putting its own hostages at risk, because of its, indiscriminate bombing campaign, with the effort, as we have seen from Washington Post reports and others, to thin out the population of Gaza as much as possible and try and get other countries to take them, as we have seen, the other, Arab countries, Egypt, etc. That is what their goal is. They don't really give a rat's ass about the hostages. And I feel like with the, I feel like I've been kind of saying that, kind of trying to make that case for the past few weeks now. But I feel like the hostages coming out and saying it in quotes in one of Israel's biggest newspapers. By the way, none of this will get I'm under no illusions that any of this will get any kind of pickup or coverage in America, in kind of mainstream American media. But, I think this makes the point pretty damn clear. Just the idea that Every day in captivity was extremely challenging. We were in tunnels, terrified that it would not be Hamas, but Israel that would kill us, and then they would say, Hamas killed you. So I strongly urge that the prisoner exchange begins as soon as possible, and that everyone needs to return home. There should be no hierarchy. Everyone is equally important. Another former hostage who returned with her children, but whose husband remains in Hamas captivity, said, and this was, again, a quote of, I think, the woman who the CNN person played earlier. You claim there's intelligence, but the reality is that we are being bombed. This is actually really remarkable. Okay, so this is literally going. This is like straight up. Only Electronic Intifada is saying this stuff, and the fact is, and Haaretz, and it's not getting any pickup in the mainstream. This is a direct quote from the hostage. We felt as though no one was doing anything for us. The reality is that I was in a hideout that was bombed, and we became wounded refugees. So again, same thing with her as well. Like she was injured. This doesn't even include the helicopter that fired at us on our way into Gaza. You claim there is intelligence, but the reality is that we were being bombed. My husband was separated from us 3 days before we returned to Israel and was taken to the tunnels. And you're talking about flooding the tunnels with seawater? You are bombing tunnel routes exactly where they are located. My daughters ask me where their father is, and I have to tell them that the bad guys still don't want to release him. Which is, really kind of and you almost get the sense that she's saying, putting the blame, a significant chunk of the blame. No, but I wouldn't say a majority or all the blame, but putting a significant chunk of the blame on the Israeli government, and just again straight up, only the only people that would dare in the U.S. say something like Gaza or the IDF fired on and most likely killed some of the people on October 7th. Clearly injured some as well, is Electronic Intifada. And they would be laughed out of any other, you would be shouted out of any other room if you said anything like that. But here we have the Israeli hostages coming out and saying it, and saying this is what happened to us. We were concerned about dying at the hands of Israel just as much as we were concerned about dying at the hands of Hamas because of indiscriminate bombing and no care for the safety of the hostages, and much more care about thinning out the population of Gaza. And, that needs to be put into the analysis. That needs to be put into the general conversation, and that needs to be put into, just the general public, factoring of the credibility of what Israel says and what all these people were hand-wringing about what Hamas did here, what Hamas did there. That needs to be taken into consideration. The fact that we have our own hostages, Israel's own hostages coming out, Israeli citizens coming out and confirming pretty much, every Electronic Intifada story that's been published since October 7th, which is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. All right. We do have to move on, though. We got a lot more stuff to get to, as this is a very, very interesting situation. Here's another one, which is unfortunately behind a paywall on Haaretz, but it's okay. Let's see if we can take care of that real quick. Okay, looks like the paywall, unfortunately, is not going to work, but it does seem like we can get there's been some screenshots that have been circulating online. So essentially saying there is a growing assessment which is really, really remarkable stuff. So it's apparently organizers planned to, so let's read this here. There's a growing assessment in the security establishment. The terrorists who carried out the massacre on October 7th did not know in advance about the Nova Festival held near Kibbutz Ra'im and decided to come to the place after discovering that a mass event was taking place there. Security systems assessment relies, among other things, on the investigations of the terrorists and the investigation of the incidents by the police, from which it appears that the terrorists intended to reach Kibbutz Ra'im and nearly other kibbutzim. According to a police source, an investigation into the incident also revealed the IDF combat helicopter that arrived at the scene from Ramat David base fired at the terrorists and also apparently hit some of the revelers who were still there. Apparently, no big deal though. According to the police, 364 people were killed at the festival. In addition to police sources, the party was planned to be held on Thursday and Friday, and keep in mind it was Saturday morning. That apparently also on Tuesday evening of the same week. It was essentially supposed to be a midweek festival. But the army approved the organizers of the event to hold it on Saturday as well, after the request of the organizers. The change at the last minute reinforces the assessment that Hamas did not know about the incident. The assessment apparently is backed up by a body cam footage of a terrorist asking a captured civilian where the bad guys are. And apparently an Israeli attack, a helicopter fired and killed some of the bad guys, of the Israeli revelers as well. But this really incredible piece of information that we're seeing coming out of Haaretz here, and it's just not seeming low, but this also comes as this is a later report. I think this is two separate articles here of the screenshots that were online. So it's saying top defense officials held urgent consultations the night before the October 7th attack about a possible Hamas attack. But no one in the IDF notified the Nova Festival go. So it's like if you had an idea, and this also, speaking of 9/11, there were also apparently people that were massively short selling Israeli ETFs and things like that right before October 7th. Could have been anyone, but this is really also remarkable stuff. It's like you get a night, September 10th. You get a warning, very specific warning about an impending terrorist attack, and you don't call anybody, you don't do anything about it. And, this is essentially what happened here. Israeli security forces apparently, according to, again, Haaretz, had enough warning signs to prepare, at least partially, for the possibility that terrorists would seek to infiltrate from Israel into Gaza. And they did nothing. Absolutely shocking stuff. There is no doubt about it. And again, just the broader point with all this stuff is factor this in when you look at the event, when you look at, assessing the, capabilities and motivations of Hamas. And, it is, I think, a lot of the conversation obviously should be about what's going on in Gaza right now. And that is definitely the most pressing issue, bar none, just the ongoing, genocide and ethnic cleansing of an entire population out of their, ancestral lands. But part of the justification for that is the activities that were done, the atrocities that were done by Hamas on the 7th of October. And we are finding out now just incredibly, disturbing details about not only the, just the nature of the attack, but also, and the IDF's conduct within said attack. But also, we are really finding out just about really just how much they were kind of forewarned as well, which is, really, really remarkable to see. And that is on top of newly released hostages saying that they were worried for their safety about just because of the incessant, indiscriminate bombing that was going on in Israel, or by Israel in Gaza, with the hostages there, injuring some of the hostages, potentially killing others in the wake of the October 7th attack. Of course, the bombing that we all know has been taking place on the Gaza Strip. If anyone has a new suggestion for a website about how to get around paywalls, that will be definitely very helpful. But, it really is, remarkable stuff, especially the way they're talking to families of the hostages as well. Just remarkable stuff. But anyway, we got to go now to domestic politics. Big news coming out of Ryan Grimm's new book, definitely a book that I'm going to be reading over the holidays, but here's what he has to write. When the morning of July 13th, 2018 dawned, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been on an unbroken streak of interview victories. The streak wouldn't last the night. When she stunned the political world by upsetting Representative Joe Crowley, the assumption was that the big story of the night was going to be the shock defeat of the next Speaker of the House. But it quickly became clear that Crowley would be the one to become a trivia question, and the real story was the rise of the politician quickly branded AOC. In the days after her victory, she was consistently a presence on national TV, creating viral moments that sent her rising further with each one. On Twitter, her clapbacks were feasted on by a rapidly growing social media following. Her direct-to-camera Instagram dispatches were bringing a rawness to politics that kept young people were craving. She was just hitting homer after homer and kept doing these interviews and just blowing it out of the park, said Soykat Chakrabarti, who helped run her campaign and would go on to become her chief of staff for a time. And every time she would do one, we'd get bigger and bigger people asking her to come on. And then at some point, all the late night shows were asking to have her, but then they have this weird competition thing where you can't be on one and then also be in the other. They get really mad about it, which is kind of funny. But still, the tool of her popularity was about to hit its limit. A mistake we made early on is we did not do enough to figure out how to keep AOC from not getting exhausted. It's incredible she didn't have a nervous breakdown. I'm just thinking about that, going from just, a normal, bartender to being a member of Congress and being, an overnight celebrity is just insane for anyone. In the middle of July, the stress finally caught up to Ocasio-Cortez, and she did the unthinkable, taking on questions about Israel, Palestine, unprepared. Corbin Trent, her communication director, and I, taking the blame there, put her in a bit of a vulnerable position on a topic that really wasn't her thing. She was on PBS's firing line, and I do remember this. I remember like, oh no, here we go. Just like this is when it's starting to get serious. Where she essentially goes in the interview and she's asked a question, and it's really kind of a stupid, question, from the perspective of somebody who, knows the issue and, has, followed it for some time. And, at that time, I was, very uninformed of the issue and not trying to put anything on AOC for doing that. You shouldn't have to be an expert to be on Israel, Palestine, to be a representative of Congress. But this is in response to, what she posted in May of 2018. And the Great March of Return, when Israeli forces continued to kill unarmed protesters in Gaza. She said, no state or entity is involved of mass shootings of protesters. There is no justification. Palestinian people deserve basic human dignity. She asked, what's your position on, this is the interviewer, Margaret Hoover, what's your position on Israel? She said, well, I absolutely believe in Israel's right to exist. She began adding that she supported a two-state solution, and said, through her lens of the activist, which I think was a very good way of framing it. She said, I think if 60 people were killed in Ferguson, Missouri, if 60 people were killed in the South Bronx unarmed, if 60 people were killed in Puerto Rico, I just look at that incident more through just as an incident, and as an incident, it would be completely unacceptable if it happened on our shores, which is honestly was what I saw, and that kind of thinking, it was honestly what spurred me to start following this conflict in the closest way that, the close way that I did. But obviously I wasn't an overnight celebrity in Congress at the time. So it's a really tough situation. So, it was kind of, unusual terrain for a politician just to equate the lives and dignity of Palestinians with others around the world. Was unusual terrain. Of course, Hoover cut in. The dynamic there in terms of geopolitics and the war in the Middle East, and it's just throwing out these buzzwords to make it sound, make that really well articulated basic truth by AOC sound so complex, sound so like scary, right? This idea of like, oh no, this is a lot of geopolitics and complicated situations. It's like, no, 60 unarmed protesters were shot. That is bad no matter where you go. AOC paused, and she took a deep breath. The First Amendment might not legally cover unarmed Palestinian protesters, but it certainly did from a moral perspective. So she's saying, so it's like, this is the Hoover quote there. She said, the dynamic in terms of geopolitics and the war in the Middle East is very different than people expressing their First Amendment right to protest, she said. So of course, just come on, let's be reasonable here. Now she starts to get, be visibly nervous. And she makes a pretty good point that it's like, it's a moral thing, just don't shoot unarmed people who are protesting, she says. But I think what people are starting to see, at least in the occupation of Palestine, is an increasing crisis of humanitarian condition. And that, to me, is where I tend to come from on this issue. She responded, visibly nervous. She used the term, the occupation of Palestine, Hoover pressed, leaning forward. What did you mean by that? From one perspective, it, of course, could mean the entire state of Israel was the illegitimate occupation of the nation that is truly Palestine. This was ruled out by AOC's initial assertion of her support of Israel's right to exist. From another other perspective, though, it could really refer to the actual occupation of Palestinian territory that is recognized as illegal by international law. But Ocasio-Cortez was, by that point, kind of like a fish out of water, saying, oh, I think that what I mean is the settlements that are increasing in some of the areas, which she's right about that, in the places where Palestinians are experiencing difficulty in access to their housing and homes, she said, clearly suggesting she was referring to the latter definition. Hoover wanted more. She said, do you think you can expand on that? But then she tapped out. I'm not really an expert on the geopolitics of the issues, she said, laughing at herself. I just look at things through a human rights lens, and I may not use the right words. I know this is a very intense issue. I come from the South Bronx. I come from a Puerto Rican background, and Middle Eastern politics was not exactly at my kitchen table every night. But I also recognize this is an extremely important issues. From there, her team decided to take a break with the whole, the interviews there. This was the first time she had a bit of a confidence hit because she didn't do incredible in an interview. After the firing line interview, she was slammed from all directions, from the left for being too soft on the occupation, from the right of attacking Israel, and from all sides of the cardinal sin of admitting to not knowing about something, which is also very, very true when you think about it. But anyway, a week later, she was at this rally for this guy named Brent Welder, who was doing a Justice Democrat squad style flip. But while there, she got a lesson on how things typically work in national politics. Corbin Trent, her communications director, got a call from a man saying he represented donors to the organization AIPAC, or the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They told him that there was $100,000 ready to be handed over to Ocasio-Cortez to, quote, start the conversation with the organization with much more than that to come. So essentially $100,000 bribe to, start the conversation. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Which is really, again, incredible stuff. It's attempting to bribe, of course the campaign was flush with cash at the time and it was rejected out of hand. It's like, and Trent goes, Corbin Trent, this is the communication director of AOC at the time. He said, this was basically a bag filled with cash. I was expecting the corruption to be much more subtle. So Daniel Moran's confirmed Ryan Grimm's reporting on this, saying the implication that her position could be repaired with conversations, that her positions were based on a lack of information and a lack of proximity to enough of a variety of people. Trent recalled. AIPAC denied the offer to HuffPost, but Moran's offers an interesting and I think correct interpretation. Before AIPAC started to make real political action committee for the 2022 elections, it's feasible an affiliated megadonor or major bundler could have gone to AOC with a policy paper and an offer and never told AIPAC itself. Flush with cash and facing no serious general election opponent, the offer, though, was not seriously considered. So again, does go to, AOC's credit, but also, we need to, I think, be more aware as Americans that this lobby is fundamentally, scaring the pants off of mostly, Democratic politicians. They are changing their positions on this. We talked about how John Fetterman had, a meeting where he took that offer very, very seriously, and we can see the results of that now. But also, there's two people who have come out, I think it was Harper Hill and this other guy who are trying to run for the Michigan Senate right now, and said they were offered, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars to run against Rashid Tlaib in the primary. And it was, it was really, really, it's kind of shocking but not surprising that it would be, that blatant. But again, talk about adding against the conversation. Boy, do we need to get, this needs to be added to the discourse. There is this lobby out there that is just straight up paying people money to agree with them and to advocate for them on a very powerful level. All right, we got to go now to our next story and our last story. Sophie Hamilton was one of the people who worked at the Goldie restaurant in Philadelphia. I don't know if you remember seeing that on the news recently as a target apparently of supposedly horrific, just Kristallnacht style anti-Jewish business protests. Really, really awful stuff. I saw that. I was honestly, I was a little taken aback. I was like, this is not a smart strategy. This should not be, protesting just a Jewish business. And this seems like an incredibly unproductive things to do, especially if that person isn't kind of like upholding or, funding or, in any way helping or, supporting Zionism openly in any way. And I think, even still, I think targeting a single restaurant is, never the most effective protest strategy. But, it was really made to seem like it was a direct attempt to target a Jewish business just because they were Jewish for no other reason than that, which is obviously anti-Semitic at the very least and fucked up, no matter which way you slice it. But that's why I was so surprised to hear this from Sophie Hamilton, who is a store manager at this Goldie restaurant in Philadelphia.
I'm Sophie. I live in Philly, and I used to work at Goldie. I was fired in the middle of November.
So this is before these protests happened.
With Palestine, and also for refusing to discipline a coworker for doing the same by wearing a Palestine flag pin. I worked there for more than 2 years. I started out as a front of house worker hourly, and over my years there, I worked up to being one of the store managers. Over that time, I only got positive feedback, really. I never been disciplined, never had any issues like that. That was until I started dissenting from the company's silence about the genocide in Gaza. I felt compelled to speak up against the company while I still worked there because they held a big fundraiser raising more than $100,000 for this group called United Hatzalah of Israel. They presented it to us as nonpartisan, non-military aligned, just an EMS group like the Red Cross. But I did a little bit of research just looking on their own webpage and on their Instagram, and very quickly found they proudly provide supplies and aid to the IDF, which I thought was unacceptable and wasn't something that I could be a part of.
Again, so this is not somebody who is, clearly not somebody who I think, is raving, frothing the mouth anti-Semite, and also not a institution or a store that was in any way, neutral about this and just trying to, go about their business and, which is objectively, incredibly tough times to be a, Jewish person. And, also, by the way, a Muslim, openly, kind of visibly Muslim person in this country, and just going about their business as, a Jewish-owned business, and they were just being, protested and harassed. This is a store that is openly supporting something that for a lot of people is incredibly evil, and especially the people that, work there. And not only were they openly supporting it and, calling for, donations for this United Hatzalah group, but they were also, disciplining people in their store who objected it, and, people may be like, oh, that's the right to do as a store, but it also in America with First Amendment right, that is the right to protest. It's, very, very important, I think context and, a much needed corrective, especially as the, really alarming, and I would say alarmist rhetoric about, the Holocaust has come to America in the form of, certain, aggressive and, sometimes even, ill-advised, but, not genocidal or, superbly violently threatening to the Jewish people. That is a reality that, you got to put into its appropriate context, not just for, the integrity of the Palestinian movement, but also for, not making Jewish people around this country feel like everyone around them is out to get them unjustifiably. All right. With that being said, we will be back on Friday.